So let's hear it for Yuri.
Thank you. With libertarians, very difficult. Yeah, libertarians, librarians, Liberians, many people don't understand where we're coming from. And yes, I have a pretty bizarre background. I worked for the Soviet government on program of perestroika by Mr. Gorbachev. He was my boss. He was all the time trying to save socialism, which is definitely you never can do. But he tried real hard. And I remember that his chief economist, Abel Aganbegyan, who was, we called him the biggest economist in the world, he was even bigger than me. And he used to say, we should build a Swedish model of socialism. And even Gorbachev understood that. He said, well, you will get all the Swedes to do that. And so that's... So he couldn't get Swedes, and so socialism fell miserably. So today we will talk a little bit about everything almost, yes, because I think that the topic of my speech is defect to New Hampshire. Because I'm kind of doomed to defect all my life, because I defected in 1989 from Soviet Union to the United States. And I can assure you that in 1989 it was a pretty, well, I wouldn't say free, but much freer country than today. And today I'm pretty old, whatever, and I just don't want to defect anywhere anymore. But it looks like we should look for these possibilities as well. I published a book a year ago about secession, about how to secede, together with John Livingston. He has an institute in North Carolina, and you know that that's just next door neighbors in Vermont. They have a project which is called Second Republic of Vermont, which is a pretty interesting project because that's what they want to do. And why we are talking about this? Why this is not so optimistic? My talk is not very optimistic. Well, there is an old Russian saying that optimist is an ill-informed pessimist. So that's one thing. Another thing, there is not so much reason to be very joyful. For what reason? Last year was the year, I would say, of a landmark year in the United States history. The amount of tax eaters now is higher than the amount of taxpayers. Thomas Jefferson used to say that the end of the republic will be when the tax eaters will have more tax eaters than taxpayers. I'm not very much for taxes, definitely not, but from another hand, if you don't have, as the government does not depend on you as taxpayers, then you are kind of disposable. In the Soviet Union, the government went completely amok because of the great amount of natural resources they had. Lenin in 1921 was writing to Trotsky saying, "Dear Leo, I think if our revolution would win in Belgium, we would be done in a week. And here we have 11 time zones." Well, he didn't add to loot, but that's exactly what he meant. And they were looting 11 time zones. The Soviet Union, I think that I maybe will repeat myself a little bit, but it was the biggest thing not to fail, and it failed miserably. Soviet Union is 3 times bigger than United States and Canada combined. Can you imagine? Completely destroyed by its own government, had all natural resources possible and impossible. However, with taxes-wise, the idea of the government was that if you don't need taxes, then you don't need people. Then what if we will, I remember talking to a senior Soviet official, and he said, you know what? I said, well, how about the goose laying golden eggs? He said, what if we'll eat eggs and the goose as well? And they did. and they murdered 60 million people back in the USSR. And that's what I think we should, as libertarians, know, that the people, like we have right now in Washington, as nice as they could look like, but the logic of the system that they are trying to implement would result, inevitably, would result in mass murder. It happened in 34 countries. All of them who practiced socialism ended up in a bloodbath. If you will look at them, and right now I think that in Washington, D.C., an occupier of the White House is a Marxist-Leninist. If you would be a true Marxist-Leninist, you would be doing exactly what he is doing there. Then what is socialism in general? Socialism is government. Any government is a socialist institution. Government can be small or can be big. You can have a little bit of government, a little bit of socialism, then you would be doing more or less okay. If you have a big government, then all the rights, everything is within the government, not within yourself. And so that kind of government usually began to kill people. For what reason? Because if you undermine economy, then you need to make people work. Under socialism, there's absolutely no incentives for people to do anything. So then you introduce negative incentives. You kill them, you shoot at them, you point guns at them, but before that you need to take their guns away. And the best, I would say, proponents of gun control were people like Lenin and Stalin and Hitler and Mao Zedong. That's how they began. Usually they would take away people's guns, because otherwise people would not be just sheeple or cattle that they would not be able to manage. Socialism is definitely, it was the society, the full-blown socialism, is society which can be kind of, I would say, compared to public slavery. You don't belong to yourself, you belong to the government. Free health care for all, free education, free everything. It is like slavery. Slaves also had free health care. They also had free food and free shelter. And however, in private slavery, that would be insane for you to kill slaves. You would be destroying your wealth. In public slavery, slaves were disposable because they didn't belong to anybody. And slaves, in many cases, would be considered as liability, not an asset. Besides that, what they did, say, in the Soviet Union and Communist China and whatnot, they created this huge extermination camps where slaves would work for and would enjoy free health care and whatnot, but they would work only for a short time. For example, in the camp called Vorkuta, which is in northern Russia, where all these displaced people were put under the end of the Second World War with the blessing of Franklin Delano Roosevelt, Truman, and Winston Churchill. That people were put on a ration. That means they were fed for half a year only. After half a year, they would be considered to be worn out already, and then they will stop feeding them. I think when I just came to this wonderful camp, I showed a video. I don't know if you had a chance to see this video. It's called The Soviet Story. The Soviet Story. This is just unbelievable. Even for me, I was born and raised in the Soviet Union. But you wouldn't believe how cruel that regime was, how they were killing children, how they were killing almost anyone who, not only because they would be against them, but just to make people feel fear. I was just talking to a gentleman that I was reading a book by Andrei Sudoplatov. That's reminiscences of the Soviet master spy. I don't know if you watched the video, James Bond movies. In James Bond movies, James Bond is fighting something called SMERSH. SMERSH means Smert Spionem, or it's a lethal foreign arm of the KGB. And Sudoplatov was the head of that. And he was sitting for Beria, the chief executioner of Soviet Union, and Stalin called him, and Stalin said, Mr. Sudoplatov, I am reading a book of poems by Bezvestny. Is he a sports commentator? Sudoplatov said, no, I think this is another one. He said, and Stalin sighed for a moment, he said, do we need two? So Sudoplatov said, I'll take a note of that. Stalin said, you better do, and hanged up. Then Beria, when Beria came and he told him what happened, and Beria said, did he say that he liked these poems or not? He said, no, he didn't say anything about poems. He said, oh, that's bad luck for all of them. He said, for both of them? Not for both of them. Find everyone with this name and kill them tomorrow before 4 o'clock in the morning. Because if Stalin would bump into somebody with this name Bezvestny, it's a pretty rare name, with this name Bezvestny, then we will have a short end of the stick. Stalin would say, I told them and they don't listen. And that was a death sentence. That was a death sentence for that. There's a great American demographer, Rudy Rummel, in University of Hawaii. He wrote 28 books about democide. Democide, that means government killing their own people. And I would say that every libertarian definitely should read one book by Rudy Rummel called Death by Government. Death by Government. Government was the most deadly disease of the 20th century. 266 million people were murdered by their own governments, and not during wars. In wars, 38 million people were killed. So together with wars, which is also a government production, 300 million people during the last century were exterminated from the face of Earth. I would say that having said all that, many people would say, well, this is maybe about Russians. The Russians, maybe they're culturally kind of backward and whatnot. They couldn't make socialism work. Well, look at Germans. Germans could make anything work. And they couldn't make it work. I am taking my students very often to Cuba. That would be fascinating. If any one of you would be interested, you can email me. I'll put you on my travel list, because I'm traveling a lot. I'm a travel freak. Because in the Soviet Union, you could only enjoy the concentration camp over there. And so I'm traveling to Cuba, and if you would be interested, it's very interesting to see real socialism. Cuba, which in 1959 was second only after Venezuela in standard of living in Latin America, right now it is completely destroyed by its government, with average wage $9 per month. In Cuba, you could see mothers selling their daughters. Can you imagine? Mothers working as pimps. Everybody is stealing something and selling something. So these proud and beautiful people are reduced to the role of slaves in that society as well. I think I mentioned in my medical speech here that one of my students, because she watched this movie Sicko by the biggest propaganda person in the world, Michael Moore, who's also bigger than me. And Michael Moore, he presented Cuban healthcare as something palatable. So she asked a friend of mine whom I met in Moscow, that we heard that you have a good healthcare system. He said, yes, we have a wonderful healthcare system, but it can be improved if we would have medicines, if we would have doctors and clinics and ambulances. So then it would be the best healthcare system. And then we were exiting already the room. He said in Russian to me, he said, healthcare, swim to Miami. That's the only way of the healthcare in Cuba. And so that's exactly, anywhere it was practiced, it failed miserably. With 300 million people died to prove that it does not work. And still we have entrepreneurs, socialist entrepreneurs in Washington, D.C., who are trying to make it work. And you can see what they do. They also treat us like cattle. And look, all this NSA, IRS, everybody is against us. The society is becoming more and more similar to that of the GDR or to Yugoslavia, or to not yet the Soviet Union, and I think that this is a pretty sad thing, that it can be, we can be looking in the eyes of the beast very soon, in the eye of the, because changes that you can believe in are going very, very fast. What do I mean? Because government is expanding very fast. Now we have General Motors, government motors. We have Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae, government institution. Government almost nationalized financial services industry. The whole American economy is regulated the way that Hitler would be envious to see that kind of regulations. You can have two types of socialism. Great Ludwig von Mises talked about two types of socialism. One type of socialism would be a Soviet type. Soviet type of socialism when government owns everything. This whole country, as he would say, was run like a huge post office by a postmaster general. The other type of socialism, he called it German pattern or Nazi pattern of socialism. That's where property rights are kind of recognized but violated. Your title for property is like your title for wetlands in the United States today. You have this property, but you cannot do anything with this property. The government would tell you what to do, when to open, when to close, whom to fire, whom to hire, what prices to charge, what prices to pay. So this kind of socialism, I think we're deeply in that already, is called German type of socialism. Both types are deadly. And you could see that Soviet Union and Nazi Germany, they were the most mega killers in the history of the world. They were murdering their citizens for this or that reason all the time. So, and we have in the United States, if you will look, national debt last year also surpassed our gross domestic product. So today, our national debt is 108% of our GDP. Greece, the tragedy in Greece, unraveled when they had 126%. It's not very far from where we are. Well, unlike Greece, we have a printing press. So that's why we can hide our public debt by printing, by something called quantitative easing, by printing more and more money at the expense of the people who are not born yet. 3 months ago in New York, Goldman Sachs and US Department of the Treasury organized a seminar of feasibility of issuing 100-year maturity bonds. Can you imagine that to issue bonds with 100 years maturity? So these bonds would be not for you, not for your children, not for your grandchildren, but grandchildren. So politicians, they found a new type of socialism that you can now transfer income not from you to me or from you to him, but from the people who were not born yet, who never saw these people, but they're already being born, already besieged by debt like that. So we either borrowing from people who were not born, or borrowing like from Chinese or Russians or Brazilians, also from the people who do not vote for our clowns. So this is the kind of the business plan which is used not only in the United States, in almost all Western countries. In almost all Western countries, Social Security is broke. For what reason? I remember very well the speech by Franklin Delano Roosevelt, which I didn't see him, but I've read the speech. In that speech, delivered in 1935 about Social Security, he said that some people do not have enough responsibility. They will squander the money they have, and they would become a public charge when they would retire. So we should save this money for them. We should force them to save, and then we stash this money for them, and they can enjoy retirement, a decent retirement, in a dignified environment. That's his words. So they took this money, and sure enough, they squandered it for us. And they squandered it for us not only here, but everywhere, almost everywhere in the world. A month ago, I was in Sweden. In Sweden, amazingly enough, which is considered to be a kind of a symbol of socialism, or peaceful socialism. And this is a lie, because Sweden is not a socialist country. They have much smaller government than we do. They have a lot of something they're addicted to, so-called social services, to get something for nothing, at the expense of somebody else. But in Sweden, they're right now privatizing their health care, and they're they're still afraid of the word privatization, so they use the word personalization of Social Security. That means that people would put money into their own named account, so the government cannot raid it. Well, it's nice to believe in that. The government, however, can undermine the currency, and Joe Salerno, I think, was very good in explaining how they can do that, and then they still can steal from you as much as they possibly wish. Because if we'll talk about property rights, about wealth, about fruits of someone's labor, all these fruits, all this wealth is denominated in paper currency issued by the government. The government can print as much of this as possible. For us, it is very easy, I would say, to understand, because we are only 11 miles from Bretton Woods. And if you haven't been there, I would advise you to go to Bretton Woods, just 11 miles. That's the place in 1944 where Lord Keynes, where John Maynard Keynes, a socialist economist from the United Kingdom, presided over Bretton Woods financial conferences, which created World Bank, International Monetary Fund, created this big government financial system of the post-war economy, post-war economy. Amazingly enough, that the chief American negotiator at Bretton Woods was Harry Dexter White. Harry Dexter White was a colonel of KGB. Amazingly enough, he and Alger Hiss, under Secretary of State, they were both at this conference. And it's amazing to see the pictures there in this hotel. It's a beautiful hotel. Even if you hate, well, Keynes, and rightly so, but the place is just spectacular. It was built in 1902, a beautiful, beautiful place. But you could see the picture of Harry Dexter White, Alger Hiss, and Soviet delegation all together. So that will be 15 KGB officers on one picture. So this is the kind of the post-war economy, unfortunately followed in the footsteps of Keynes. Even Nixon, who's considered for some reason to be a conservative, which he was never been, he used to say, we're all Keynesian now. We're all Keynesians now. Keynesianism is another form of socialism, another form of financial socialism, when the people are being managed. The government is managing aggregate demand. That means the government is managing you. And the government, again, is managing us as we are cattle, or as we are slaves. So if you will look also about the percentage of the gross domestic product in the United States redistributed and owned by government, it's all the time on the increase. Well, I prepared a PowerPoint presentation on this kind of, but with Russians nothing works. I mean, the technology and Russians are incompatible, so I cannot show you that. But if you email me, I will be happy to email you this presentation. But over there, I have some graphs showing, for example, quantitative easing, money supply by the United States Treasury and Federal Reserve. It goes like this. It goes like this right now. Money supply increased during the last 6 years. It increased from $600 billion to $3 trillion, fivefold. Can you imagine? And government is the first recipient of these funds. So this is something called extra budgetary kind of thing. You go around Congress, you go around everything. You just print the money and you pay for the paper. Great von Mises used to say that only government can take a useful commodity like paper, slap some ink on it, and make it completely worthless. And that's, I think, what we should expect very soon. Because if quantitative theory of money works, and it is, and it worked everywhere else, we should expect inflation when people would not be so scared. Today, people are sitting on money, companies are sitting on money because they don't know what future holds for them. So when they would kind of relax a little bit, then I think we should. What can we do? Nothing much, because if you look how financial sector is so overregulated that you cannot move any money around. If you look at the Patriot Act, for the Patriot Act, it's not only gross violation of our civil liberties, but for an economist, it's a gross violation of property rights. They came up with this phony idea of money laundering, and today you cannot move money anywhere in the world from the United States. I have a friend who is Swiss. She is a Swiss citizen married to another friend of mine who is an American. Because she has an American green card, Swiss banks declined her in opening Swiss accounts. They don't want to do anything with the United States because they're afraid of our bureaucrats raiding their books, raiding their accounts, and doing all kinds of things. If you will go to all these Caribbean islands, which were so-called safe havens, if you go to Cayman Islands or Barbados or whatnot, that's where the people would say it's offshore heavens. Not anymore, not anymore. They don't take U.S. money, U.S. citizens' accounts at all. And you can see what the government is doing right now with NSA. No such agency is eavesdropping on all of us. I did some seminars for the senior, and still doing that, for senior government officials in Washington, D.C. And I've been to NSA, and I can attest that this is a city, a big town. It's bigger than Lancaster and Gorham and Littleton combined, and maybe 5 times bigger. Just amazing how much money we spent on this kind of things. So I would say that definitely this is great to see you all here. Lou Rockwell, an old friend of mine, unfortunately couldn't come, but I remember, and I have this slide with his quote, saying that von Mises would be thrilled, Murray Rothbard would be overjoyed of seeing all of you here. This is fantastic, that the ideas of liberty, that we are not historians of decline, that ideas of liberty are spreading around, that people can see. Well, having said about socialism never work. So in the long run, I am kind of optimist that socialism would never work. But should we go through the same rigmarole of killing people, of trying to save your loved ones, to save your property, to save your everything? No, we don't. And I can attest also to you that United States, when I came to the United States, was number 3 on the index of economic freedom. You know that there's in Vancouver, Canada, they have a Fraser Institute, which every year they calculate the world index of economic freedom. And they look at property rights, at free trade, at taxes, it's all about government regulations. And at that time, United States was number 3. Only after Singapore and Switzerland. Today it's number 18. Number 18. So you can see that we are losing our freedom, and this freedom is so cherished, and it's so difficult to get it back. Because, for example, with healthcare, because if people, or social security to that matter, if you provide something like that, then majority of people would consider it as a right. And it would be impossible to take it away. And this so-called social services provided by government would be of appalling quality. Appalling quality. In the USSR, 78% of AIDS victims got the virus from the dirty needles and tainted blood in the state-run hospitals. This is the free healthcare for you, free healthcare. Pensions, Social Security in the same Soviet Union was $16 a month. $16 a month. But people foolishly believed that, well, that's better in the United States. People are dying on the streets, dying in the whatever, because they don't have, we have something for nothing. The same ideology I see here. I live in Wisconsin. Next to us is the Socialist Republic of Illinois. And they have, the good thing about they have, it looks like, more governors in jail than I think all of them were in jail. The last 4 or 5 are in jail. And the last was Blagojevich, a socialist. But I remember I was watching TV and there were a demonstration in support of Blagojevich. And they asked one elderly gentleman, why does he support Blagojevich? And he said, he gave me a free bus ticket. Can you imagine? You can buy a person with a bus ticket. I think we should remember Benjamin Franklin, who said that those who would like to trade their liberty and certainty would get up nothing. No liberty, no certainty. On this cheerful note, I think that what if we will discuss issues that maybe are interested for you and interesting for you, and your comments are also very much welcome.
So the US empire will collapse like the Soviet empire, but the Soviet empire is probably better now than before, but not that much, and it didn't go well for those who wanted to secede, like, for instance, the Chechens, or some others seceded better, like the Baltic countries. What's future for when the system collapses?
Yes, well, it's kind of my favorite actor is Leslie Nielsen. If you remember in his movies, they shoot each other the same on there. So it's very close, but I still couldn't get what. Yes, Soviet Union, when Soviet Union collapsed, it collapsed and it broke on the 15 pieces. And that's what's interesting for an economist is to see, because it was almost pure experiment. The countries shared economy, shared history, shared atrocities under Stalin and Lenin and Khrushchev and other crooks. And so they went to freedom in their different ways. And it's interesting that those who have chosen freedom in an uncompromising way reached much farther. If you will look at countries like Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, in the Soviet Union, gross domestic product per person was $2,000 approximately when Soviet Union collapsed. Today in Estonia it's $30,000, in Lithuania $26,000, in Latvia $24,000, in Russia $8,000, in Ukraine $4,000, in Belarus, which was a star performer in the Soviet Union, it's $1,200. In Central Asian republics it's $500, $600. So you can see that freedom works. I mean, anywhere they practice freedom, it works pretty nicely. And I would say, I think that for you as libertarians would be interesting to know that the first prime minister of Estonia, of Free Estonia, he was 27 years old and libertarian. I did some consulting for Kikkoman Foods, you know, the soy sauce people. And I brought them to Estonia. At that time was very funny. I said, well, how about going to Lithuania? And they said, Lithuania, isn't it a cold medicine? I said, no, that's a country. I said, how about going to Estonia? I said, what is that? I said, the Estonian part, former part. Well, we will hire you and you will guide us. Also was funny because I never did consulting, so they asked, how much do you charge? I was thinking, how much? I said, well, how about $35? And I got a call from Tokyo, and he said, "Oh, let's make it 100 at least." And I said, "All right, but you don't know how maybe I'm a slow worker." He said, "That's irrelevant." And so we went to Estonia, met with Prime Minister Mart Laar at that time. And the Prime Minister said, "Well, can you imagine, I became Prime Minister to find out that we have $24,000 in our treasury. And the full basement of pictures of Lenin, meaning Russian rubles, worthless. So 24,000, what could we do?" He said, "First, we legalized prostitution, gambling, and firearms." He said, now he said, you can buy firearms even at the gas station or at a toy store without showing your driver's license. And Mr. Sameya, who was the president of Kikkoman Foods, the soy sauce from Japan, he just gasped. He said, "Why without your driver's license?" And Prime Minister said, "Sir, pedestrians can be pissed off as well." And it was very nice, yes. And then he quoted Heinlein. He said, "Armed society is a polite society." And then Japanese people said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Look, you are not armed, but I am very nice to you. I put mineral water and pencils and notebooks that you can use. But if you would have Uzi guns, I would be even nicer." And sure enough, Estonia did spectacularly well. Not just because of that, but because that was his major point was just to tell people that there is no nanny state over them, that they're in charge, Prostitution in Estonia was a very sleazy place under the Soviet Union. A lot of sex tourism from Finland, Sweden, Germany, people would come to Estonia. You could see pimps and prostitutes everywhere. When they legalized that, it all went into yellow pages where it belongs. Yes, all is in yellow pages. Crime dropped 80% in just 2 weeks. So you can see the less. I said, "Well, if you are such a libertarian," I said, "why wouldn't you legalize drugs?" He said, "I've tried to. But the same day I got 2 phone calls, one from British, another from the US ambassador. And they said, you have a Russian bear behind your back, you want to spoil relations with the West on that one issue. So he said, we didn't legalize drugs, but I can reveal you a well-kept state secret that we don't prosecute for drugs either. So this is the way to go. And sure enough, Estonia is a star performer in that part of the world. Right?
You mentioned earlier that when you were working for Gorbachev, I think it was a previous talk actually, but you mentioned that your ideas were like utterly rejected. I assume that you mean you were pro-market and basically. Were you an Austrian then? Did you get your ideas, from the Austrian tradition, or basically, how did you come to pro-liberty Austrian economic perspective?
Right. So how did I become Austrian, and what Mr. Gorbachev was doing? Well, he didn't know, I think, what he was doing. All the time, my immediate boss was first deputy prime minister of the USSR. And we would all the time discuss what's happening behind this birthmark. Nobody knew what's that behind this birthmark. Nothing, because he was like a clown all the time, saying that Stalin perverted this wonderful image of socialism. Socialism is the most humane society, and so we should revert to the human face of socialism. And then everybody would be so attracted to that, and the whole world will become socialist just like that. And I was thinking whether he is just joking again, or or that he is really so imbecile, whether he is stupid or evil or what. And because he was repeating that as a parrot, then many people. I think I told this joke about. I see that some people work here, but maybe I repeat this joke that CIA didn't know what's happening, sent their best spy to Soviet Union. He's walking from one store to another saying, no bread, going to another, no meat, no butter. And the KGB guy is looking over his shoulder. He said, 10 years ago you would be shot for doing that. The CIA guy is right, no bullets. And so that's... And so that's, but when everybody realized they ran out of bullets, then everybody stopped working. I remember I had a secretary, a nice young lady, and I see her taking paper clips into her purse. And I said, Lena, why are you stealing state property in such strange form, paper clips? And she went just ballistic at me. She said, Yuri, what else can I take from this F office? Just point, I'll take that. There's nothing else. Said, how about picture of Lenin? She said, I'm not in a mood to open a shooting range. and so you could see that the things were falling apart. I mean, that was pretty kind of nice. So how did I? Well, somebody cruel gave me, when I was a sophomore at Moscow State University, a book, Road to Serfdom by Hayek. In that book, yes, and just for one night, it was a very blind copy of this book. I mean, because it was done through the carbon paper in Russian, very bad translation also, maybe 10th copy. But I just swallowed the book overnight, the whole thing. It was, at that time in the Soviet Union, for just having this book, you can get 7 years of jail. For passing it around, 15 years. It would be called dissemination of anti-Soviet slander. And if you are interested in that, I did the talk about my book. We have a program in my college called Books That Changed Your Life. And so I was hiding behind furniture, but then they picked me up from there. And so I didn't have a choice but to prepare this about the Hayek book. Returned back to my office, and there was a phone call, and the lady said, I am from Glenn Beck show. At that time, I'm not watching Glenn Beck. I'm not subscribing to any televisions or whatever, Netflix, that's the only one. And I am contemplating dropping that as well. Too much socialist propaganda there as well. So then, so I didn't know who Glenn Beck is. And she said, well, Mr. Beck, Thomas Woods advised us to invite you for a program. What kind of topic you can suggest? And I just returned back I said, how about Road to Serfdom? And she said, what is that? I said, that's a book. She said, a book? Oh, who knows? Who had a book? And I said, you can work this Road to Serfdom around. I mean, it can be a dead end in the Road to Serfdom, or detour or a ditch in the Road to Serfdom, or whatever else. And I said, okay, I'll ask Mr. Beck. I will call you in a half an hour. She calls me in 5 minutes. She said, can you come to New York tomorrow? I said, no, I can't. I said, next Tuesday. And she said, all right, next Tuesday. And so we were with Tom Woods. We were on this Glenn Beck show. And what I am proud of, not because of Glenn Beck or whatever, but I was proud. I think there is some force in television. Next day after the show, this book, which is pretty obscure book, published in 1944, became bestseller #1 on New York Times list of bestsellers, on Amazon, on Barnes & Noble. I was very proud of that. That was very, very good. And why? Because Mr. Beck was waving this book saying, America, read this book. And people listened. Yes, people listened. So that's why I think that I have many friends, libertarian friends, I just finished a book about Tea Party movement called Tea Party Explained. And it should be published in September already. And many of my friends, libertarians, they're saying, why would you be with Tea Party? Because I'm speaking a lot at Tea Party rallies and whatnot. And I think, and they don't like Tea Party. Well, Tea Party is a group of people. It's not a movement, it's not a party. It's just a bunch of people who don't like something. And I think that us as libertarians, we should be where the people are. We should, I mean, just it's wonderful to preach to a choir, to have the people here, because it's nice, because I feel sane when I am among the people that think the same as myself. So, but we also should spread the word, and I think that this kind of people like Tea Party movement is very, very important as well. Mm-hmm.
Earlier, you referred to Obama as a Marxist. Some people would argue that he's more of a fascist by the definition of merger of state and corporations. What would your opinion, I mean, is it still your opinion he's a Marxist, or would you say he's more of a fascist? And if you say he's a Marxist, is there anybody in Soviet history that is reminiscent of Obama as far as personality, policy, the way of going about doing business?
Very good question, because I think it was nobody else but Stalin in 1935. Before 1935, fascists were considered, Nazis were considered to be left-wing, as well as communists and socialists were considered to be left-wing. In 1935, Stalin, speaking at the 7th Congress of Comintern in Moscow, he said, no, they are not left-wing. From now on, we should depict them as a right-wing. And because they are the same. They are absolutely the same. We have National Socialists. Hitler's party was German National Socialist Workers' Party. And Hitler, he borrowed so much from Marx. He didn't acknowledge that it's from Marx because Marx was Jewish. And his kind of idea was, he was trying to kill all birds with no stones, Hitler did. Because what Marx was trying to do, he was for the class struggle. That the class, the rich, we should loot the rich, we should expropriate expropriators, as he would say. So we should take from them. And Hitler, according to Goebbels, his propaganda minister, he realized that you can combine that people at that time in Germany was the anti-Semitic feelings, and Jewish people happened to be rich. So at first, and he was after that. And the same thing Mr. Putin in today's Russia is doing, because he is going after, he wouldn't call them Jewish, he calls them ruthless capitalists, cosmopolitans without motherland. And no, like that. He put the most, the wealthiest one, Mr. Khodorkovsky, is right now rotting in the Eastern Siberia jail with roaches and rats. And so this is the kind of the completely, and that's, again, that's a German pattern of socialism right now emerging in Russia as well. So I don't see much of a difference between them. One is based, and I showed, I think when I just arrived here, I showed a wonderful video called The Soviet Story, which I advise everybody to watch. It is on the World Wide Web, so you can, if you put The Soviet Story full, F-U-L-L, otherwise you will get a lot of trailers. But then you can watch it for free on the internet, or even some people ask me to show it maybe tomorrow night somewhere there. So if anyone would be interested, then we can watch it. We can watch it again, say at 9 o'clock tomorrow or something like that. This is a fascinating movie about Nazism and socialism, Marxist socialism. And they have wonderful, I mean not wonderful, but very persuasive quotes from Goebbels. Goebbels was saying, after Hitler, Lenin is the greatest. The greatest man after Hitler is Lenin. And like that. So that's and how they also were before 1941, before Hitler outsmarted Stalin and invaded Soviet Union, that they were allies in the Second World War, the Soviets and the Nazis. So I don't see much of a difference between these two. And if you will read, I was so interested in that I've read even Hitler's book, Mein Kampf. And if you look at this, it's a very socialist book, very socialist, against rich people, against for class justice and stuff like that. That's what he uses to say. Right? Any other questions or comments maybe? Or I depressed you enough?
I wanted to reply to the previous person that it does not matter so much who Mr. Obama is like. I think he is very much a Marxist in his education and his origins, etc. But just like if you put Ronald Reagan at the head of the Soviet Union, he couldn't turn it into a capitalist country. And if you put Mr. Obama at the head of the United States, he can't turn it overnight into the communist country he'd like it to be. So he has to do with what it is, and what it is not a communist country. It's a a more and more fascistic country.
Right. Well, on Netflix, there is a pretty interesting movie. I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but Murray Rothbard used to say, I'm not conspiracy theorist, but conspiracies happen all the time. Left and right, mostly left. And that was what he said. And there is an interesting movie you can watch and just think about it. I'm not saying that it is 100% truth or this is untrue. It's called Dreams of My Real Father. About Mr. Obama, the idea of the movie is that his actually real father is Frank Marshall. Frank Marshall was a card-carrying member of the Communist Party, and he affected Mr. Obama, whether he was his biological father or not, but Mr. Obama spent, if you will read Dreams of My Father, then you would see that he was very close to him. He was his ideal, whatnot. Even if not, the Barack Hussein Obama Sr., his formal father or whatever, he wrote, and I read this, it's interesting, it's on the internet, it's called East Africa Journal, 1966, but you can easily find it through Google. The future of African socialism. And Obama Sr. is writing, I'm not a socialist, but I strongly believe that we should have taxation of 100%. But we should give people what they want. So we should tax them 100%, but give them what they want. Well, it never worked that they would give you all you want, but this is not even socialism, this is communism, full-blown communism. So Mr. Obama, and some people say, well, you don't like him, whatever, he's so nice. He is nice. He is nice. He is a pretty smart. But so were communist leaders all the time. Lenin could speak 7 languages. Trotsky could write poetry in French. All of them were very smart. There was the first Soviet government was the most educated government in the world. All turned into mass murderers. Mafia people would be dwarfed by the amount of evil and crimes that they committed.
I wanted to say that I think that fascism works great for Obama right now because he's got the corporate structure. He's got that kind of tied in with government and just like Mussolini, I guess. But I think that his ideas going forward are with the globalists, are with the global elite that actually do want a fully communist arrangement, with them kind of running the show and a whole lot less people on the globe. And I see Obama being a wonderful puppet for these people.
Absolutely. I was in a World Libertarian Congress in Warsaw, Poland, some time ago, and I was sitting at the lunch with a lady from United Kingdom, and she said that she was a card-carrying member of the British Communist Party, and even member of the Central Committee of the party. And I said, "What brought you to a libertarian conference?" She said, well, when Soviet Union collapsed, socialism collapsed, I tried to find why it happened. And sure enough, as a Marxist, she went to Marx. And she was rereading Marx, and one thing, she found a letter, famous letter from Marx to Engels, that true communism would occur in 400 or 500 years. So it was premature. And another, that communism can occur only globally. It can't win in one single country. So the end of the earth cannot take place in one country. It should cover the whole earth. And so that's what that was her point, that we should return back. I said, why libertarians? She said, libertarians are the most pro-capitalist. So they would make capitalism ripe for socialism. Can you imagine how confused, royally confused people are? It's a failure of British public school system. On this cheerful note, I would like to wish you all successes in your personal endeavors and in our movement, because we are the hope, and if not us, then whom? So that's, I think,
Yuri Maltsev! Sons, as I write you this letter, of days past and days yet to come, and the message of freedom, the message of freedom. I stand at the edge of the pages of history and lessons unlearned. It feels like these pages are remaining unturned, but boys, it's no mystery. Children, I'm sorry to leave you this world in a state of disaster. It was given to me in a similar state, but I woke up so